This is Julian speaking, welcoming you to another video out of the breach. The story of Eric the Unsure continues, and the work Susie puts into these stories is simply amazing. It will be a long one, and it will be epic. So grab a drink of your choosing, or your paintbrush, or both, and enjoy the story part 4. The third task. Eric swallowed a mouthful of bilge water, the golden ale's hoppy flavors wrestling with his tongue. Miserably he stared at the cloudy liquid, forcing his thoughts towards fighting techniques, weapon maintenance, or tracking skills, anything that wasn't what had been plaguing his mind for months. He flicked his eyes to the source of raucous laughter, a table where Flintlock and Gotchgut had retreated to play a game of Heathstead Hold'em poker with a group of sailors. They laughed again as one of the sailors triumphantly scooped the latest winnings across the table. "It ain't over yet!" Flintlock rubbed his hands together and leaned forward to scrutinize his next hand. Eric stared back into the ale and twisted the tankard. "Grog for your thoughts, Eric," Agatha said, wiping a plate with a white cloth. Sipping the ale, Eric muttered, "It doesn't matter." Agatha wandered down the bar closer to him and lowered her voice, saying, "You're usually so cheerful. Something clearly does matter." He plucked at the tankard's handle. "Have you ever worried that you've been doing the wrong thing your whole life? Or caring about the wrong thing?" A wry smile spread over her lips. "After this place nearly burned down last year, I thought I'd wasted my life as a tavern keep. First, I thought I was destined to die, then I was saved. Then I never thought I'd ever recover what I'd lost, but people joined together and helped me rebuild." Eric stared at the ale. Sighing, Agatha rolled up her sleeve, revealing pink skin beneath that looked like melted candle wax. "Life leaves its scars, Eric. It's not easy, but I believe if you're meant to do something, the path will be clear to you." Eric's eyebrows shot up and he met Agatha's gaze for the first time. Bitterly, he thought, her eyes are still blue, not amber. Maybe that was some proper advice and not some nonsense from the foxwoman. The front door opened on squealing hinges and Agatha eagerly looked to see who had walked in out of the spring storm. Eric twisted round to watch the Baron stalk inside, taking the surroundings with a grimace. Eric turned back to his ale. "I thought I'd have a bit more time to myself." Agatha gasped, and the room behind Eric drifted into silence. Intrigued, he peeked over his shoulder and was surprised to see a troll hunched just inside the doorway. Wooden antlers and a mossy mantle pressed against the ceiling. A particularly ripe mushroom puffed a cloud of orange spores, leaving a stain on the fresh paintwork. The troll looked grumpy, his ears and nose large and drooping, which at least made his protruding teeth seem less formidable. Green swirls whirled across his skin, most of which was on show, although his large tattooed belly hung over a leather loincloth. His nails and toenails were greenish-grey and had all manner of dirt stuck beneath them. Deep green stones hung around his neck and topped his gnarled staff, which he was leaning against heavily. He sniffed, wiped his nose on the back of his hand, and looked at the Baron. "What can I get you, sirs?" Agatha smiled at the pair. The Baron swept forwards, ignoring Agatha and glaring at the other patrons, who went back to whatever they were previously doing. The troll remained hunched by the door, looking bored. "Ah, Eric, I hoped you would still be here." The Baron grasped Eric's elbow, guiding him off the stool and to the side of the bar, where it was quiet. "Just doing as asked," Eric smiled thinly in thought. "I wish my stomach would stop churning every time I see him. It's so annoying." The Baron returned the thin smile. "I have to go back to the Council's chambers soon. We only have a short recess while the non-essential members leave the building." "Oh, is there something I should know?" Eric asked, knowing what the answer would be. To Eric's surprise, the Baron paused before replying. "No, not at the moment. Very soon, though, I think. Things are moving more quickly now." The Baron frowned and looked troubled. Without thinking, Eric said, "If I can help, I will." The Baron examined his squire. "I know, Eric, we'll see. But in any case, I have a task for you now. One that I think you'll benefit from a great deal." Despite his earlier misgivings, Eric eagerly asked, "Oh, of course. What is it?" "I'd like you to accompany the troll to Bumbleton." Eric stamped in a puddle, sending the water splashing onto his other boot. Furiously, he thought, "The Baron just trying to get rid of me for a while. I did what he asked me to. I saved Ermentrude. I did what Poppycock said, and they both seemed happy about the whole thing at the time." He kicked a large stone off the path, sending it spinning into the undergrowth. "It's not my fault the Commonwealth Navy has to reroute around the archipelago. They shouldn't have been sailing near the shrine in the first place. Now I've got to babysit this stupid troll." The troll huffed behind him. Eric glanced over his shoulder, the wax hood of his cloak and the relentless rain obscuring much of his view. What light there was had started to fail, casting more shadows over the troll's face. The troll's expression was as grim as it had been when they first started walking. Suddenly, the troll stopped plodding, irritably splashed the end of his staff on the muddy road surface, and walking into the trees. Rolling his eyes, Eric stomped after the hulking figure. The troll's staff softly illuminated the trees along the path he was taking. Then it disappeared as he strode inside a small cave. He lowered himself onto the floor, crossing his legs, and placed the staff beside him. Eric scuttled inside, shaking water from his wax cloak as he removed it and hung it on a small stony outcrop. The troll pulled dry sticks and kindling from the pack he had been carrying, placing them in the mouth of the cave. He muttered a short phrase, and fire bloomed. "You can use magic to make fire?" Eric gasped.
"We've been walking in silence for hours while anger roasted your brain. I reckon you could have started that fire just by looking at it."
The troll's voice was deep and clear. He spoke nothing like most of the other trolls Eric had met. Eric stared at him in disbelief.
"Now, are you gonna talk about whatever's making you a pain in the arse to be around? If not, go back to Macburg so I can be in better company. My own."
Eric plonked down onto a low rock and stared into the fire. "I'm sorry, I've been rude, Mr.
My name's Noll. None of that Mr. Nonsense, and you're Eric, right?"
"Yes, that's right." Eric smiled and held out his hand. Noll rolled his eyes but carefully placed his own calloused hand in Eric's.
"Now, why've you got a face like a smacked bum? You're wondering why you're babysitting an old troll down to a tiny farmstead when you could be, what, playing with your sword?"
Eric blushed. "I wouldn't quite put it like that."
Well, I'm going to harvest some rare fungus that only appears at this time of year, which I put in me healing salves. But don't worry, I don't need help, so you can go on home."
Noll pulled a large radish from his bag, tossed it into his mouth, and crunched loudly. Irritation flashed through Eric's brain. "Then why did the Baron ask me to join you then?"
"Old Fancy had said you're a skilled healer, and thought you might appreciate learning some new recipes. I might not look like much to a hothead, but I'm one of Tauber's finest healers."
Noll chewed on another radish. "Oh!" Eric ground his toes into the compacted earth. Noll poked at the fire with a long stick.
"Spit out whatever you want to say before I die from suspense."
"Oh, the Baron, did he really say I was a skilled healer?" Noll's small eyes bored into Eric's, and earnestly he said,
"Yup."
Nodding, Eric's shoulders relaxed as some of the tension left his body. Maybe the Baron does still have faith in me. Maybe I can forgive him over time. Noll dropped the stick on the ground and the pair stared into the small fire. Feeling rude and growing uncomfortable in the silence, Eric eventually blurted, "I went on a shortcut through Darkwood once. Would it be quicker to get to Bumbleton that way?" Noll scoffed.
"You met the Thornes, did ya? If you met the cultists, you probably wouldn't be sitting here. They don't like visitors to that temple, although at least then I'd have some peace."
"Aren't you associated with a Lesherwold, though?" Eric indicated the horns on top of Noll's head. Sighing, Noll said,
"I'm a worshipper of Leshavit, aye, but I'm not a cultist."
"There's a difference?" Eric frowned and scratched his head. Noll rolled his eyes again. Breaking a thick stick in two, he grumbled,
"They teach the young rubbish in books and how to stab things, but not about the old ways."
"You could teach me, though?" Eric smiled, an unexpected eagerness settling into his chest, pushing the last of the tension away. Noll stared at Eric with narrowed eyes.
"Are you really interested, or are you messing with me?"
"I'm interested, I promise." Eric held his hands up. Noll smacked his lips, rubbing his chin. He said,
"Them of us what are worshippers follow Lesh and other gods, believing in balance and have a love of nature. Them cultists lean more towards decay, chaos, and death."
Eric felt something stir in his guts, a wriggling interest that stoked his attention, desperate to hear more.
"They believe that Leshavit will rise again to consume us all.
That sounds bad, Noll grunted.
Not bad, just different.
Are some of the cultists bad, though?
Some of the cult are a bit zealous, making them unstable or unreliable rather than bad. They all protect their temple, though, from everyone except them what worship Lesh somehow, and that does make them dangerous, I suppose. The ones what get their magic from Leshavit are the ones you gotta keep your eye on.
Does your magic come from Leshavit?
Sort of. Some of his followers and cultists get his blessing more directly, though.
Does that mean magic is something I could be taught then? Noll smiled, the firelight flicking over his face.
Yep, magic is something you can learn if you have a feel for it. Though many races use magic on instinct, and other folk receive blessings from powerful beings.
Powerful beings? Like who? Or what?
Leshavit, Around, Kaiana, the Well Maidens, Bier, Dranya, Arisa, Tam Wakefield, Taulada. Those are a few. Do any of them names mean anything to ya?
Eric pursed his lips. Well, Around is the Lord of the Deadlands, so everyone knows about him. And we still do well-dressing ceremonies in Fancidel for the Well Maidens, but I thought it was just a superstition? Noll smiled at the flames. Reaching into his pack, he rooted around and pulled out something on a string.
A gift for ya, young Eric, seeing as you're interested. Don't go losing it, mind, and don't think this means we're friends.
Noll tossed the item over the flames, and Eric grasped it from the air. A small carved stag skull stared up at him. The pale wood was warm in the firelight, green beads on the cord shining. Without thinking, he pulled the necklace over his head. Running his thumb over a carved symbol on the forehead, he felt a sensation of beastly eyes watching him protectively. Eric's pulse pounded in his ears, and he felt himself being drawn towards the world Noll was describing like a moth to a candle. You said the cultists believe Lesh will return to consume everything. What do you believe?
That more than just Leshavit will return, though not to consume, but to embrace us. The truth is probably somewhere in between, though. Now, will you stop your annoying questions so I can get some shut-eye? Don't know why I ever agreed to go on this trip with someone else, and I'm not gonna get a moment's peace for days.
Are we not going into Bumbleton itself? Eric asked as they left the path towards the town and started to scale a low hill. Unlike the previous day, it was sunny and warm. Eric had removed his cloak and rolled up his sleeves.
If we was going there, I'd have taken us there. No, the fungus grows in the ruins in the woods.
Oh, what ruins are those? Eric asked excitedly. Noll looked at the sky and mouthed something Eric didn't catch before saying.
Stormguard, the old old capital of Tauber. Bumbleton was originally built there, but the land wasn't fertile enough, so they shifted all the buildings west.
Plodding upwards, Eric pondered. I didn't know there was an old capital. I wonder what's that all about. I don't think Noll would like me to ask, though. Maybe Flintlock can tell me something. They crested the hill and descended again, striding towards the wood. Eric tripped and stumbled a few steps. Peering into the grass, he spotted a large stone poking through the soil. He bent to pick it up, but it didn't move. He rubbed some of the mud from its surface, revealing a weathered, carved flower beneath his thumb. Are these the ruins? Eric called, pointing at the stone.
No.
Noll strode through the tree line into darkwood. Eric jogged into the trees after Noll. Sliding to a halt, his mouth fell open. Large stone slabs and ruined walls were scattered throughout the woods, soft grey glowing in dim light. Spindly, sickly trees had grown up and through many of the old buildings, and dark ivy grew rampant. Noll had stopped by one tree. Holding a branch between his hands, he was muttering a low chant. The woods were strangely quiet around them. Grasping the stone at his neck, Noll released the branch and bowed his head.
There. We should be a bit safer.
Safer? From what? Eric touched the carved stag skull at his neck.
This is a wild place. It's always best to be prepared.
Noll stepped over a wall and gestured for Eric to join him before he disappeared behind it. Eric scrambled over the wall, carefully dropping down on the other side so that he didn't trample anything. Noll had his hand gently cupped around 5 thin lumps protruding from the ground.
Ghosts and mushrooms. This is what we're here for.
He pulled a crude knife from his belt and dug into the soil, cutting a circle around the mushroom. Carefully, he lifted the fungus, clearing the black soil to reveal a shape that resembled a pale hand stretching upwards with clawed fingers. Eric shivered. What do you use it for again? Noll gently placed the fungus in a large pouch hanging from his belt.
Very powerful healing potions and salves. This one mushroom will make about 10 measures. Needs to be heated to make it effective, though. Now, don't sit still staring at me with your mouth open. Go and find some ore.
The eerie white of the mushrooms were easy to spot in the dark soil and shadow of the woods. They took it in turns to spot or lift the mushrooms, handling them with great reverence when they did. After several hours, Eric stood to stretch his back and looked towards the edge of the wood. A bolt of panic fizzed as he thought, "All I can see is trees." "Noll, do you know the way back out?" Noll stood and stretched his own back.
Yep, 'cause it's that way.
Crack! The fallen tree trunk Noll had stepped on snapped under his foot. The ground beneath was in fact a rotten wooden floor, which collapsed under the sudden weight, sending them both plummeting into darkness below. Eric felt his left shoulder connect with a rock and he cried out in pain. Then he was rolling down something gritty before careening off into nothingness again. Another wooden platform disintegrated as he landed on it. Nothingness. Then a pile of soft soil and leaves broke his fall. He kept his eyes squeezed shut as dirt and wood rained down around him. His pulse echoed in his head with the rush of adrenaline.
You're right, Eric.
Noll coughed from not too far away. Eric opened his eyes and saw blackness. I'm not sure. I can't see anything. Noll muttered something to make the stone in his staff glow faintly, providing gentle illumination in the dark cavern. Eric looked around desperately. There was no sign of where they had come from. He sat up with a howl, his shoulders screaming with pain. Noll scuttled over, a cut on his forehead leaking dark blood.
You've dislocated it. Me pack's gone, and so I don't have nothing to help with the pain.
Noll felt inside Eric's own small bag and pulled out a simple scarf, which he turned into a makeshift sling.
Let's get out of here. I'll take a proper look at your shoulder when I've got more light.
Eric nodded, nausea flaring at even that small movement. Can you see a way out? The crystal glowed brighter, and Noll surveyed the walls of the cavern.
I can see where we came from, but there's a crack over there. Let's try that.
They had stumbled into a maze of old stone tunnels with no logic behind what led where. Many times they went in one direction only to have to retrace their steps and try something else. The pain in Eric's shoulder made it feel like an eternity of trudging. He had no idea how long it had actually been. Clusters of moonstones helped to light their way, the lack of daylight making them as big as Eric's head and deep blue. Noll's staff and the glowing moonstones occasionally illuminated carvings on the stone walls. A common motive was a carving of a man's head wearing an old-fashioned helmet and crown, which Noll said was something to do with the old king. Eric no longer cared about history, his shoulder hurt too much. Eventually Eric's legs couldn't carry him any further, and the pair settled into the nook of a rock to rest. Sleep came in fits and stops for Eric, plagued by strange dreams of shadows being eaten by green light. He awoke the next morning stiff, nausea pulsing in time with the pain in his shoulder. With genuine sympathy on his face, Noll ground up one of the ghost's head's mushrooms between two rocks. Eric swallowed it down with the last of the water. He didn't have the heart to tell Noll that it didn't help much. They began trudging through the darkness again, and pressed on for at least an hour before Noll hoarsely whispered,
Stop!
What is it? Eric asked sluggishly. Noll turned his head, his ears moving, listening all around them. Gingerly, Eric rubbed his face, then stopped as he heard something too. They both held their breath, listening. Eric whispered, That's definitely armor. A couple of people are running in it. There are boots too, although not from a trained army, as the steps are all out of time. Something wooden, maybe? It'll sound like sticks hitting the ground. Voices reached them too. No words, only moans and guttural cries. Eric felt goose pimples erupt all over his body, and Noll went pale.
Run!
Noll gasped and grabbed the front of Eric's jerkin, pulling him into one of the tunnels as he ran. Eric winced in pain, but he knew he had to keep going. The strange sounds echoing behind them were slowly catching. He kept his eye on the swaying low glow of Noel's crystal and did his best to dodge stalactites. Eric grasped his necklace as he ran and thought desperately, "Leshavit, help us!" They rounded a corner, then another, running up a gentle incline, their panting breath an accompaniment to their heavy steps. Eric felt light-headed and pushed his legs on, with no way out in sight. Suddenly, the tunnel opened out into a cavern, light winking at them from the far side. "We're finally going to get out! Leshavit helped us!" "Stop!" a female voice screamed from the shadows in front of them. Noel slid to a stop and Eric bumped into him, crying out with pain.
"Regan Fanglash, it's me, Noel."
His crystal flared brighter and he stepped forwards. "Do you know him?" another voice called from Eric's left, and he scanned the darkness for the source. "Yes, he is a follower, Callista. Hold your magic for what's behind," Eric called, her voice echoing around them. A third voice chimed in with a giggle, adding, "How interesting! Leshavit sends us aid in the form of someone you know, Regan." "Gwendoline?" Eric stumbled around Noel towards the sound of the third voice, making out the fairy's form in the soft light. Gwendoline muttered something, and soft light bloomed from crystals around the chamber. Stood atop an outcrop, she opened her wings and drifted down, her expression stunned. "Eric? It really is you! What are you doing here? How did you get hurt?" Screams and howls reverberating through the tunnel they had emerged from, and Gwendoline pushed Eric behind her into the lee of a large stalagmite. Grasping his wooden sword, Eric stared down the tunnel. A warband burst from the darkness there, like rippling shadow. Watching them emerge with disbelief, Eric thought, "I must have a concussion or some sort of brain injury." Leading the way was an armor-clad soldier wielding a short spear. Except where its head should have been was a salviating boar's head. It squealed its anger, gnashing its teeth at them. Behind was a skeleton, wearing a single greave, running at them wordlessly, flanked by 6 other partly armored skeletons. Their bones rattled, scraped and rasped against the stone as they ran. A figure covered in a sheet appeared, its head a teetering horse's skull on a long neck. Its eyes glowed sickly yellow, and the jaw clacked open and closed. Grasping hands wriggled distended fingers tipped with long claw-like nails. Dozens of tiny things swarmed around the warband's feet. They were unusual items or animals with short legs, yellow magic glittering on their surfaces. They chirruped and squawked as they ran. Eric squinted into the dimness and watched a crossbowman decked in chainmail duck behind a large shield. The crown motif they had seen in the tunnels was painted onto the shield's surface in sticky black, but where the man's head once was, a skull stared out with hollow eyes. Finally, a knight emerged. He strode around the tower shield, his dark armor intricately inlaid with shining filigree. He opened his skeletal jaw, thrust his gleaming sword forwards, and bellowed. The 3 women cried their anger in reply. Noel's deep rumbling shout a fine accompaniment. Then the 4 Leshavult hit the creatures with their magic, sending flashes of light dancing over the rocky walls. Eric heard at least 2 bodies fall. Gwendoline flew forwards, grasped one of the skeletons and threw it hard into a wall, leaving it to crumple to the ground. 3 skeletons rushed for a woman with antlers. She clapped her hands, then pushed outwards with a great effort. Loose stones and dust flew away from her in a ring of flesh-green magic, colliding with the skeletons and sending them spinning away. Noll brought the end of his staff down on 2 of their skulls with satisfying crunches. Then he turned his attention to the tiny things, crushing them in small groups with staff and foot when they got too close. A fawn glided over Eric's head, muttering and weaving her fingers in a complex motion. The boar knight below her squealed. Raising its spear, it began to rush towards Eric. Vines and brambles wound round the boar's legs, thorns ripping into its skin, sending blood spraying. Eric gagged from the stink of the thick, dark blood. The fawn twisted her hands, tightening the vine's grip on the boar and wrenching it to the ground. It squealed once more, but the sound was cut off. The fawn floated away to find another target. Gwendoline intercepted a skeleton and shouted, "Eric, look out!" She sent it hurtling into the rock not far from him, where it impacted with unsettling snaps. Eric didn't notice. He was distracted by the crossbow bolt sticking out of his chest. It glowed faintly with crackling yellow energy, which was pouring into the wooden necklace resting against the bolt. I didn't even get a chance to hit anything, Eric thought numbly, gasping in a bubbling breath. His knees buckled, sending him slumping to his side, his shoulder and chest bursting with pain. He grasped the necklace, which was warm like a summer's day, and thought, "At least I'll get to see you soon, Mom." The darkness was a void, nothingness forever. Eric felt no pain and was at peace. He turned his attention around himself, but saw nothing and no one. Oh, maybe we don't see our loved ones when we die. I thought you met everyone again in the Deadlands.
Do you wish to be dead?
The painful booming voice echoed all around him. Ow! Yes! Eric tried to push his non-hands over his non-ears, but all was blackness.
Do you truly? For I shall make it so.
Eric floated quietly in the dark for a moment. No, I don't want to be dead. I have more to do.
Yes.
Oh, I wasn't expecting that response.
No.
So, what now?
You must see the light.
Eric examined the void and saw nothing. What light? There was no reply. Well, that's irritating. Maybe if I'd asked Noll more questions, he could have prepared me better for some sort of light. Or maybe Gwendoline really did care and had seen some good in me, so she could have taught me more if I'd stuck around. Even Herb, I bet he could have taught me something. Calders, clemency, flintlock. Oh, Gertrude, I wish you were here. The Baron, too, I suppose. He has taught me a lot. And maybe he did do the best for me. He examined the void again and saw nothing. At this rate, I'll never get to see the fox-woman and tell her my choice. I'd always been too afraid and been led by others before. But now I'm ready to make my own choice. Whatever happens, even if she has been lying to me, I know I need to help people before I go to the Deadlands. A point of emerald light flickered in the distance and raced towards him. A cacophony of growls like every creature on Tauber calling at once galloped with the light. Eric stood tall and waited. The light stopped above him more than an arm span away, the sounds now rumbling around him. Beneath the cascading light a towering figure emerged, dressed in a patchwork of leathers and furs, with a long green woolen cloak. Green light stared down at Eric from the eye sockets of a large stag skull, a wreath of ivy around his neck weaving up around his antlers. He held a staff as thick as a sapling in one hand, and his other rested on his chest in greeting. He tapped his gnarled staff against the non-ground, the hollow boom dropping the animals into silence. The top of the staff began to smoulder.
I hope to see you again, Sir Eric. Make your choice well and with your heart.
Leshavit thrust a smouldering end of the staff into Eric's chest. The blackness was replaced by emerald fire and the smell of burning. Eric opened his eyes, and his vision was sharper, although tinged green, the scent of wood smoke filling his nose. He rose from the ground in one sleek movement. He swept the sling from his arm, grasped the boar's spear from the ground, and strode forwards as if in a dream. In front of him, the fawn screamed and collapsed, the horse skull creature bearing down on her prone form. Eric thrust the weapon through the skull of the shrieking creature, crumpled in a cascade of bone fragments. Eric strode on. A few paces away, a bald, rotund, rat-like creature honked discordant music from a flute that replaced its nose, and waved a short sword with glee. A helmet with squat legs hopped behind in time with the music, sharp barbs glinting on its sides. Eric stabbed the spear down and through the tiny things, making them pop into motes of yellow light. The crossbowman fired. Eric simply leaned out of the way. Eric clutched his carved necklace and closed his eyes. He took a deep breath and released it, sending a wave of green magic swirling out and away like feathers on the wind. The magic wave hit the remaining creatures in the cavern, and they buckled, lying motionless. The ornately armored knight had withdrawn from his fight against Gwendoline and Noll. Ducking behind the crossbowman, they both avoided the magical wave. He said something in a guttural language, and another bolt came careening towards Eric's face from the crossbowman. Eric swatted it out of the air as if it were a lazy fly. Then Eric was at the shield, which he ripped from the ground and tossed aside. Grasping the crossbowman with his left hand, he thrust the spear through its torso with his right. Stinking, sticky blood poured from the wound, and the creature went still. Eric dispassionately dropped it in a heap. "You will see more of us yet soon," the ornate knight rasped, then turned and ran. Pointing after the knight, Eric said calmly, "But not you." A dazzling dart rocketed from his finger, striking the knight between his shoulder blades with a flash of forest green. The knight collapsed to his knees, shuddering and wailing eerily. The wail dissolved into silence, and he fell forwards with an echoing clang. Eric turned and strode out of the tunnel, the scent of burning wood still strong. He scanned the cavern, looking for further prey, his vision emerald. "Eric!" Gwendoline shook her head in disbelief, yet her smile was radiant. The green tinge began to fade at the same time his mind began to clear. The pain from his shoulder started eating back into his attention. Wincing, he sat heavily on the stony ground. He looked down and was surprised the bolt was still embedded in his chest. "That's twice in a few months I've been shot. At least I'll have some interesting scars." Tiredness washed over him, and he couldn't keep his eyes open anymore. Rain pattered on the roof, waking Eric from comfortable sleep in a warm bed. He didn't open his eyes, choosing to lie in darkness and take stock of any bodily complaints. "Shoulder feels a little sore, but it's definitely back where it's supposed to be. Chest hurts, but that's also nowhere near as bad as it could be." He swallowed, his throat dry. "You've been asleep for a few days. You best drink something." Eric opened his eyes and smiled at Gwendoline. "It's nicer waking with you here rather than Noll," he rasped. Gwendoline helped him sip some water. Then she said, "He's visited you every day, but I asked him to fetch more healing ingredients from his home. As priestess, I outrank him here, so he had to listen to me." "Priestess? Where are we?" Eric scanned the dim room, which was simply furnished but comfortable. The structure itself was wooden with a thatched roof high above his head. "Tjaldimin. Well, the village that surrounds the temple in any case." Eric frowned. "I've been allowed near the temple of Leshavit?" "Of course. After what you experienced during the battle, even Reagan likes you." Eric nodded. "I don't really know what that means." As if reading his thoughts, she said, "Reagan is the Thorne you saw. Trust me, she's difficult to please." Eric nodded again, his expression sobering. "What happened?" Gwendoline beamed at him. You saved us! We were attacked by... No, not then. Last year. With you, and us, and the witches. Oh, Gwendoline fiddled with the rough edge of a blanket and sighed. I thought we were helping Leshevit to rise again, so I was sent to delay you all getting to the Elridge. It turns out we were wrong, and something else happened. Eric's guts began to wriggle. What was it? Do you know? She chewed her lip. The Elridge unleashed something. That librarian, Tabby, said it was the first Elridge or King Churnet or something else from long ago. He's incredibly powerful. We've been hearing more and more reports of strange things. Those shades appearing. We've been fighting what we found, but the council just aren't doing anything or telling anyone about it. Eric thought about all the secret meetings the Baron had attended. Why not? I think it's because they're afraid, and because the Elridge haven't been seen since this happened. No one knows what to do. They're all scared. The Baron, Queen Diana, the witches, all of them. We need to be ready to fight because something's coming and it's going to be terrible. Eric considered her words for a long moment. He believed her. He felt a pang of homesickness too at the mention of the Baron. I can't believe I miss him, but I really want to see him. Flintlock and Caldus too. Herb, I hope you're nearby, as I could do with a drink and a chat. Quietly, Gwendoline said, I thought I was doing the right thing by Leshevit. I'm sorry I hurt you. I didn't expect to like you as much as I did. Or to... She fiddled with the blanket some more. To what? Gwendoline looked him in the eyes. To see your true potential, Eric. You're going to be a knight. I've seen it. What sort of knight? Fighting for whom or fighting against what? I don't know. I've seen you in green, purple, and yellow colors, doing incredible things. You will have a choice to make soon, and I thought you should know everything before you do. He stared at her eyes, which were their usual purple. Why are you looking at me like that? I'm checking your eyes aren't amber. She laughed. Amber? What, like a stone? No, like a fox. Her smile disappeared and surprise crossed her face. Have you been speaking to Janya? To a fox or a fox woman? He didn't reply. She smiled faintly again. I knew you were important, Eric. Be careful with her. She's a trickster after all. Eric closed his eyes and sighed. What now? Well, you can rest a bit more. The potions Noll has given you will make you sleepy, so you can stay here as long as you like. Then you're welcome to see the temple before you go home. He looked at her again, excitement stirring. I can see the temple? You became Leshevit's vassal for a short while. You will forever be welcome at this temple. Trickster Week had ended 5 days ago, and Drenya's hangover wasn't abating. The fairies knew how to throw a good party. She had enjoyed taking the form of Butterfingers, acting so out of character for him that the Fae would be gossiping for months. She stayed in a warm den watching Eric's adventure unfurl, pleased that she didn't have to interfere at any stage this time. Eventually, she mustered the energy to teleport herself next to the temple. She stared in the direction of Eric's hut and thought, "Now the third path is before you, Eric of the Lesherwood. Are the petals beneath your feet plump and fragrant, or shriveled and rotting?" Her fur rippled as her disguise settled in place, and she now looked like cow-faced claws. She crept inside and wrinkled her nose at the highly scented incense, her stomach turning. Quietly, she snuck to a corner and scanned all the different censers and incense burners. There, at the back, was a goblet-shaped clay burner simply decorated with red glaze. She grasped it and thrust it into a pouch at her side, then grabbed a bowl of the pungent incense and tipped it alongside. She spun to walk towards the exit, but Reagan stood in her path, watching, expression stony. "I don't know who you are, but you are not Claus. Your disguise, you have chosen poorly." Reagan's hands moved quickly, and green magic fizzed noisily around Dranya's head, the illusion of Claus disappearing, leaving the anthropomorphic fox in his place. Hey, I'm nursing a hangover here," Dranya cried and rubbed her forehead, grimacing. Reagan's eyes grew huge, and she backed away. "Dranya? What?" "Just don't worry about it, alright?" Dranya and sauntered out of the temple. Reagan ran after her and stopped just outside the doorway, keeping her distance still. "Dranya, wait!" Dranya stopped, her back still to the temple and her tail swishing. Reagan fumbled for something to say and awkwardly asked, "Why did you take some of our incense?" Sighing, Dranya turned and folded her arms. "You wouldn't understand. Just give it a few months. Actually, maybe a bit more, and it'll all make sense. Now I have work to do. Do you mind?" Reagan shook her head and watched Dranya disappear without a hand movement or muttered word. 1 minute the fox woman was there, the next she was simply gone. Reagan took a shuddering breath and turned, falling over a bucket that had somehow appeared behind her. Her robes went flying, and she struggled to untangle herself, the bucket clattering underneath her. She scrambled to her feet and ran into the temple, the sound of Dranya's laughter following her.